need to have 70% or else you have trouble at the fund level.
Okay, the promised example. Blake?
So, so this is a comprehensive example, and it's kind of an extreme, but it's interesting that they actually put it in the regs, the tranche 2 regs. And so what this illustrates is on a mathematical basis, you could have effectively a 40% product of all of these calculations and still be in compliance with the substantially all rules and not be penalized. So they give an example of 90% of the QOF assets are invested. So again, you met that threshold. 70% of the tangible assets in the quasi business, the subsidiary entity, are quasi business property. And then the secondary test, 70% of the quasi business property is used within the census tracts, qualified census tracts. And then finally, the 90% holding period is met. So again, when you do the math on that, you come up with a 40%. So again, we would never advise a client to walk the line this tightly, but it's a good illustration, I think, of just how the math works. And so anyway, that's.
I don't think we talked about the 90% holding period.
Yeah. So did anybody else want to address it? Or, yeah. So the 90% holding period, again, in the code in tranche 1, they really didn't define that. And actually, there's a lot of discussion in the tranche 2 regs that they felt like there was a lot of leniency in some of these 70% tests. So they felt like the holding period that property had to be held in the opportunity zone boundaries was pretty critical. So they didn't give any relief on that, and so that's a pretty, I wouldn't say it's harsh, but you know when you have, and I still think they got to come out with some carve out, because you could have a delivery, something with a lot of delivery aspects to it. Or you could have facilities in and out of the zone, and so they have trucks, trucks just, hauling raw materials back and forth. But anyway, they definitely gave a lot of thought of setting that substantially all test much higher on the holding period than they did a lot of the other tests. So currently we're stuck with that 90%, but I do think that they may back off for certain types of industries, because I think it could eliminate some companies from meeting the qualification tests.
I was going to say real quick, so one of the things I think with that example being included in the regs that there are obviously, folks, I assume a lot of you in this room, you want to do a deal in the zone. You're like excited about this program. You're like, there look like there are some great tax benefits. You're all on board. There's also the community development side of the equation, who is excited to have these deals happen, but really don't like what things like that make it look like when all of a sudden it's like, wow, you're telling me that only 40 cents on a dollar might actually go into my community. So I'm actually a little nervous that they put that in there as far as how that's going to kind of come out. And there are a few things that were in the latest tranche of proposed regulations that I think maybe this could affect, or these sorts of things could affect. One is that they've kind of got open that there's going to be anti-abuse provisions written on a lot of these different sections. They haven't really said what those are, but just that they will apply, so that could be one piece where this affects us. But they've also asked for a reporting requirement. I guess I don't remember exactly how it was worded, what their request was, but they're asking for feedback from the community, not the community, but everyone. Like, what do you want us to be collecting as far as information goes on these funds? And so I think just some of these sort of things, especially once you start to think about what the real reason for creating this program was, it was to bring investment into these areas, into these communities. So I think just even when we're talking about it, we have to be a little bit sensitive to the fact that it still needs to be something that's bringing, revitalization to these communities.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also an issue thinking about the legislative intent here was clearly to drive not just investment in real estate, but to drive investment in job creation, right, in actual businesses. And some of these thresholds that we're working with, depending on what your business is, as has been mentioned, makes it really challenging to think about how to do that. When you think about where is your inventory at any given time, where's your delivery trucks, where are your salespeople, all those things, when you start to look at activity in the zone, we start to have a lot of people, as we've just looked at our manufacturing and distribution client base, which is a significant piece of what's happening in the Midwest right now, it's a hard threshold to hit.
Yeah.
So as we think about kind of intent, I think your point is very, very good from the intent of what we wanted to happen in the zone, but I don't know that we have rules that are compatible with that original intent.
Right, and that's an excellent point, and there is a whole subgroup that's watching this program, highly suspicious of it, and so I would encourage you to when you're if you're the project manager or if you're the advisor to get your clients to gather the information, job creation, the economic increase in the community, all those types of things. California, they've got several pieces of legislation, and it's unbelievable what they have. I mean, they probably have 25 things that need to be gathered, and it's very burdensome on smaller projects. But they do have some conformity measures working through the House and Senate right now, but could be a lot of hoops to jump through. My comments to the legislators there was to not require that on smaller projects or when the majority of the investors are local developers or business people, but maybe if it's an outside, some big New York fund doing it, maybe they can ask them to do it. They have more resources, but it could be a burden. So moving on, just to kind of close out this section. So there's some special testing considerations that I just wanted to point out. As we've heard before, the timing of the self-certification you can kind of game the testing a little bit, but you got to really watch. You have to be self-certified before those first dollars come in, or that first tranche of money that comes in is going to be disqualified, and your investors are going to be extremely unhappy in hiring the attorneys in the room to sue you. The other that you heard, but to reiterate, Tranche 2 regs talk about the ability to, and it's an elective measure, but you can elect any monies that have come in the last 180 days. Those are they're going to automatically be treated as qualified opportunity zone property, and so you kind of get really up to a year to meet the tests. Leased assets, and the Tranche 2 regs had some really interesting things, and actually probably half of my deals are operating businesses versus real estate deals, so I was very happy to get clarification on these. So leased assets they're much more lenient. They don't have to be new assets. They don't have to get substantially improved for the most part, but I'll get to an exception to that. And so if you have a client that leases property, even though it's not new, they are going to be treated as the first user of those assets. From a valuation standpoint, you can either use the GAAP if they have certified audited financial statements. Smaller deals, they're probably not going to have those. In that case, use an alternative method, which could include a net present value concept. Then there's a related party rule, and I actually
have a question on that.
Yep.
So what if somebody, if we're leasing the property, but then we've got obviously the timeline to make payments on that? What are your thoughts on prepayment?
Okay, well,
thoughts on prepayment of leasing?
Well, they don't address it in the regs for just a third-party lease, but if it's a related party lease, they limit, you could disqualify that lease if you make more than 12 months of lease payments, and that would be used to kind of game some of the testing and things. And so again, you have to watch that. You know, we wouldn't, as a practical matter, we wouldn't see that happen that often.
It's not a normal term.
Right. You can't, you know, if it's real property and you lease the land and put a building on it, you know, that all works. They don't, you can have, they can build something and lease that property to a related party, and there's not a problem as long as it's fair market value. The one thing to watch out for, though, in a lease situation is if you are leasing that property from a related party. Again, the 12-month rule, and they do require, because they don't want you to just, you know, meet this test by going in and just moving assets from your existing business. Within the 30-month period for substantial improvement, you have to go and buy an equal amount of qualified property. So it's kind of a backdoor substantial improvement test. You're not really improving those assets, but they want you to go out and buy an equal amount. So you can't have more than 50% effectively of your assets being leased property. In the situation that I was just working on yesterday, they're going to go in and making real estate improvements as well as buying more equipment. So we should be able to meet that side test. Also, let's see here. We talked about this earlier, that the proceeds from a disposition of qualified opportunity zone property within for the 10-year period, that will not be counted against you as you have those funds sitting there for a period of time. They give you a 12-month period to reinvest those in other qualified opportunity fund property. But again, make sure that a lot of people interpret that the gain gets deferred, as we heard earlier. That's not been settled yet. They're going to try and come to that conclusion, but you have to really watch that until then. The final thing I'll say is, moving an existing business into the zone, that can be a little tricky, but it is, since it's now going to be first used in the zone, you can meet the qualification test. It's a little harder if you buy an existing business that's in the zone. So, again, come and talk to me if you want to hear more about that. We'll go to the next slide. I'm not going to go in. This is just for reference, but this is kind of covers the gating. How you roll out these funds over the period of time. It's a little busy schedule, but I think I use this when I'm sitting down with clients to kind of walk them through, because there's a lot of steps and a lot of foot faults that can happen. So you really have to monitor this. And the final thing I would say is, to protect yourself, I think it's really, you have to use a lot of worksheets with them, and I think you have to get clients to sign off that they've done certain things, because I can't, we've already had situations where clients, they tell you that they did something and you find out they didn't. Luckily, we're still in the sweet spot where we can fix it, but you're going to have clients that, said they formed an entity and they really didn't, so, and then you're going to be in panic mode on June 28th.
Thank you, Blake. And I think that brings us close to the next topic, where if you get back to the heart of what is the tax benefit here, it's a tax benefit for investors. It's a deferral, a reduction, and a potential elimination of capital gain at different points in the life of the fund or life of your investment. So, Rohit, can you speak a little bit to considerations that on the investor side that they should be looking at to feel comfortable that their fund is actually a qualified opportunity fund?
Yeah, I actually have a question for the crowd, if I may, before we jump into that. How many in the crowd are service providers, either accounting or legal? Okay. How many are developers? Good amount. How many are property owners looking to figure out whether the property can be attributed or sold? Okay. All right. And then the group that probably doesn't want to self-identify, how many are family offices or investors looking to invest? Oh, okay, good amount. All right. So, you know, at the end of the day, the really important factor here is how are the offerings being structured? So obviously my colleagues to my left are the tax experts. On my end, I'm just going to be looking at it from a securities perspective as to what we can put together in the documents, how do we structure the fund, and what is going to work to the benefit of the investors that are coming in. Now, one of the first questions that people normally look at is who exactly is going to be running the fund. If you were JP Morgan, which right now has a $1.1 billion offering, it's going into Brookfield, into several different assets in Brooklyn. All right, that seems there's a little bit of confidence in there, right? Because they know what they're doing. But if it was a smaller group that was trying to do this more on a private equity basis, well, the question ends up being, how exactly do we structure it so that it's attractive to investors? We certainly need to meet all the tests. We understand the factors of the timelines. But one point that gets really tricky is if I'm a fund and I need to make the offering, but I've got a very short window, how exactly do I do a capital call? So it's not like your typical private equity fund wherein we can have a term of, let's say, an offering term of a year or a year and a half. But if we need to start development and we need to invest into some underlying entity, we have a very short window to do that. The second question is, how do I qualify as a fund, and am I an investment company, for example? People sort of get confused about this, right? We file your Reg D, but are you actually going to be